I already shared the slides. I hope it's fine, like I said.
Yes, perfect. Many thanks. We can see them, so it's perfect. And so I think we can start again. Yeah, we can already see the screen of our next speaker, who is Dr. Sylvain Calinon. He is a senior researcher scientist at the EDIAP Research Institute in Switzerland, where he leads the Robot Learning Interaction Group, and he is also lecturer at EPFL in Lausanne, in Switzerland. So his research interests cover mainly robot learning, optimal control, geometrical approaches, and human-robot collaboration. And his work focuses on human-centered robotic applications in which, as we are going to see today, the robot can acquire new skills from only a few demonstrations by the human. And so, Sylvain, you have 25 minutes, and I'll give you a short reminder when there are just a few minutes before the end of the talk. And I'd like to remind to all the participants that if they have any questions to Sylvain, they can write them in the chat, and we can go through them at the end of your talk. So many thanks.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation. So I come from the IDIAP Research Institute. It's a research institute in Switzerland, specialized in machine learning, and I'm heading the robotics group at IDIAP. So we are interested in various forms of robotics. First, robots at the shop floors, involving human-robot collaboration. So mostly targeting SMEs, where we need to have the robots sharing the same workspace as that of the users, and where we need the robot to be reprogrammed. We are also interested in other forms of robotics, robots that are close to us, parts of us, or far away from us, either with assistive skills or using teleoperation when it's robot being far away from us, or even like robots that are part of us, like prosthetic devices, for example. And all of these robots require some form of human-robot collaboration. So what I find fascinating with these different types of robotics is that we need the robot to be reprogrammed in one way or another, because we need to have the robots adapting to new situations, to new tasks, and to new users. And to do this, in order to have a user-friendly way of reprogramming the robots, we are looking at learning from demonstration challenges in order to teach to the robot new skills in a user-friendly way. So there is an underlying machine learning challenge, but machine learning is nowadays highly influenced by approaches requiring huge amounts of data, while I believe that in many of the applications that we have in robotics, we don't have access to such data. So it means that we need to find structures or prior knowledge so that our robots can learn with only few demonstration data. So here during my presentation, I will discuss several of these structures that we can use in order to facilitate the learning process. And I will start with first the learning structure. So what can we use as mechanisms to facilitate the machine learning? So first, we are not really in a setup where the data is already here. So it's not that we are splitting the data into training set, test set. We can actually have mechanisms so that we can acquire the data on the fly, meaning that we are in a setup where we can exploit interaction in order to get better data. And we can also exploit interaction in order to get data for a specific robot or for a specific task or for a specific curriculum. So in some way, we do not really have learning, but we have more like a scaffolding process. And I like this metaphor because when we build a house, we first need a lot of scaffold. So we need a lot of support first. And when the construction is progressing, we can progressively remove the scaffold. And here the learning system is a bit something similar. So first the user needs to be here, potentially doing quite a lot, but progressively the robot can acquire the task and we can reduce the amount of support that we need to provide to the robot. And there are many underlying challenges behind this. So first, we can use users to learn the task, but we can also have the robot refining the task on its own, and we need to combine these different learning strategies. So there is a first meta-learning problem of orchestrating these different learning strategies, potentially also having to cope with different users, where each user can bring some support to the robot that can differ from one user to the other. Then there is also the challenge of finding interfaces to facilitate this monitoring of the progress of the robot and to reprogram robots. So if we look at what exists, on the one side, we have teaching pendants that are quite bulky, sometimes difficult to use. On the other side, there are virtual reality headsets that we believe are maybe too far to be used in practice as everyday for everyday work. But there is something intermediary that is the smartphone that could be an interface that is providing the capability of using buttons a bit in the same way as the teaching pendants, but that can also exploit augmented reality capabilities on recent smartphones. So we are interested in investigating how these augmented reality components can be used to first teach a task to a virtual robot. And when the user is happy with the task on the virtual robot, then the task is transferred to the real robot. So here on the video on the right, you see first the user programming a virtual robot. And then after having displayed the movement of the robot, the user is running the same movement on the robot that is on the side, that is on a real robot this time. Then there are obviously a lot of control challenges when we talk about learning skills. So we are not only learning trajectories, we are learning actually controllers. And if we want to exploit the torque control capabilities of the robot to have robot working safely with the users, then we need to also have a control and planning component being taken, being considered all together with the learning problem. So first, I would like to start with a toy example, a toy problem of computing the crossing of two segments. And I will first start with a stupid way of solving this problem. So a stupid way to solve this crossing of segment problem would be to say that on average, when I'm on a segment, it would be to take the center of this segment and saying that, like limiting the knowledge about being on a segment to a single point. So if we do that, it means that we have one point representing one segment and another point representing the other segment. And if we have discarded the orientation of this segment, then the only way we have to find the crossing is to compute an average of these points. So here, obviously, no one would compute the crossing in this way. But sometimes when the problem is highly dimensional, and if each of these sub-problems is something complicated, we are sometimes tempted to do that. And what it means in terms of probabilistic formulations, it means that we are first considering a sub-problem, we are computing a solution, and we are ignoring what are the variations that are possible around this solution. And when we are ignoring what are the uncertainty to be considered, then we are doing this behavior of compacting all of the information to a single point. So here, if we look at it from a probabilistic perspective, what we are solving as optimization problem is here a sum of quadratic error terms, where we have precision matrices that are here full precision matrices. And it's this part of the problem that is indicating the direction of the segment. So here, if we would change the information to a single scalar weight, the problem we would face is that we would compute the average of the 2 points instead of computing the crossing. So here, by keeping these full precision matrices, and by solving this problem, we have a weighted sum of mu, but with weights that are full matrices. And here, the solution of this problem can be computed in an explicit form, and it's actually a product of Gaussians. So in the next few slides, I will show several examples where we are using a product of Gaussians in order to compute a solution to a sum of quadratic error terms. What I think is also important to note is that depending on the shape of these Gaussians, or depending on the shapes of these precision matrices, we can cover actually a large range of problems. So first, the sub-problem is to consider scalar superposition. And on the boundaries of this problem, we have actually hierarchy constraints that can be considered. So when we have null space projection operators, it's still a product of Gaussians, where one of the Gaussian will be a very elongated Gaussian. And the problem would collapse to a projection problem. So this fusion of information by taking into account uncertainty, it's well known when we are solving problems like Kalman filters, for example. So one example of a fusion problem is the Kalman filter, where we have a movement model, we have a sensor perceiving the environment, and then we need to fuse these different sources of information by taking into account uncertainty. But now I believe that we can use this also in many tasks where we are designing several controllers. And if we exploit this uncertainty information, then we can also fuse different controllers in order to do a task. And here, this can be viewed as several experts. So they don't need to be necessarily a Gaussian. So if it's a Gaussian, the problem is quite easy to solve. But it could be also like other distributions. And here we would talk about a product of expert. So I believe this can be used to move from movement primitives to behavior primitives. So movement primitives is well known as a way to organize different bricks of movement, where each brick can be quite simple, and the combination of the simple bricks can form a more complex trajectory or a more complex movement. And the same mechanisms can be used when we talk about behavior primitives. So this time, it's not necessarily time dependent, it can also be time independent. And here next, I will show 4 different experiments that we conducted in our group that is exploiting this notion of behavior primitives. So first, I will start with dynamical movement primitives. That is a superposition of a feed-forward control term with a feedback control term. And here we have a scalar superposition. And I will extend this to what we have seen before, where we are considering a fusion problem with full weight matrices. And if we do this, it means that we can have a similar mechanism where we have an imitation policy corresponding to the feed-forward term, and where we can consider a conservative policy that here we don't need to pre-specify it as in DMP, but instead we can use optimal control in order to find a controller. Typically, it will be a LQT controller. And then we want to combine these two controllers in order to have a product of policies that can replicate the task. And we demonstrated in this work that we could do this in several state space, including joint space, pixel space, or force space. We also showed that this can be used as a way to combine anticipative behaviors with reactive behaviors. So here it means in this work that we are first demonstrating a task to the robot with possibly different options for the task. And for each of these options, we are also demonstrating the variations that are possible. And during the reproduction, we would like to exploit these different sources of variations with different modes and with different variations within each mode in order to replicate the task robustly and to adapt it to new situations that can change during the movement. So in this case, by moving the box to have a robot being reactive to this change of target. Now, a similar formulation with these weighted sum of, with the sum of quadratic error term, we can also find it in planning problems, and typically in linear quadratic tracking problems, where we have cost of this type, where one part is about tracking some path, one part is about using low control commands, and where the constraint is to follow some dynamics. So that would be the easiest example with quadratic error terms on linear systems. And here with this, we can already consider controllers to reach a target. So here, the way this system would be used is typically to define an endpoint with some precision matrix. And solving this system here will consist of finding control commands in order to bring my system to the desired target. So here it can be computed analytically, and I will show that this result can be applied to in various robotics challenges. So first, there is behind this a probabilistic interpretation. If we think of this as the example I was showing with the two Gaussians crossing, here we have something similar, but this time we're in a trajectory space. So we have control commands that can be stacked to form a trajectory. And we also have here a product of Gaussians, where each Gaussian is at trajectory level in the control space. One Gaussian is saying that we should not move, and the other one is saying what to do in order to track efficiently. And then the product of the two will find some compromise, and it will compute this in the form of a controller. And we can extend this to various problems. So it doesn't need to be only at endpoint, but it can also be via points. And the nice point of this is that because of the probabilistic formulation, we can combine this with learning techniques. So typically the pipeline is that we are first using the demonstrations in order to understand what are the different phases in the movement and what are the variations in the movement. Possibly also looking at the transition probabilities, and then building a controller that will use this representation as the reference that the system needs to follow. So if we combine this representation with the LQT, then we can find a series of control commands that will bring my system to these different phases of my movement, and that can exploit the variations. So it means that here I have a controller that will be soft when we don't need to precision, and that will be stiffer if we need precision. So here it means that I could compact the demonstration so that only 3 Gaussians were used to represent the task, but the behavior is still quite elaborated in the sense that if I'm perturbing the system will reject perturbations in a smart way by taking into account the variations that are allowed by the task. So here we are talking about a minimal intervention principle when we have this kind of behavior. The robot is doing only what matters for the task, and it's obviously much safer for the user because it means that the robot can be controlled in a softer way. So currently we are extending this to ILQR, iterative LQR, differential dynamic programming, or model predictive control. So the same mechanism that I showed as linear quadratic tracking can also be exploited within different optimal control approaches. And this is what we are currently investigating in the MEMO project. Now, this combination of this product of experts can also be used in the context of shared control. Often when we have torque control robots, we think of the option of having the robot compensating for the effect of gravity, meaning that the user can demonstrate a task to the robot while the robot will appear as if it has no weight, as if there are no motors in the articulation. So it's already some form of human-robot collaboration in the sense that the user is providing the guidance to do the task, and the robot is compensating for the effect of gravity. So the robot still has a controller being applied while the robot while the user is demonstrating the task to the robot. Now, what we are interested in is to extend this principle where the robot is not only doing gravity compensation, but where the robot is helping the user by constraining some part of the movement. And what we can do here is to define a dictionary of virtual fixtures or haptic guides that will help the user to demonstrate a task without having to care about all components in the task. So typically here, we can use these virtual barriers as a way to constrain the orientation of the robot to be always pointing at an object of interest, or maybe to always stay at a given distance to this object, or more simply having the end effector always pointing to, always keep maintaining a desired orientation, or even like staying on a plane or staying on a line. And if we define this as a dictionary, then we can use these different bricks in order to help the user in different ways. So now I will talk about object-centered representation, because so far I was presenting the problem always as located at the robot base, so always like observing movements and trajectories in the single frame of reference. But in reality, it's important to consider multiple coordinate systems and multiple frames of reference if we want to better adapt to new situations. And here I will demonstrate this with this simple animation, showing what happens if we are considering two coordinate systems, one being located at the robot base and one being located at the object of interest. So the one located in the robot base will be displayed in red, and the one located at the object will be displayed in blue. And here the fusion of the two is displayed here in yellow. And here, as you can see, the yellow distribution here is the result of a product of Gaussians that is taking into account the two coordinate systems. And in this way, if the two coordinate systems are moving, then the resulting behavior can still consider simultaneously these different coordinate systems in order to generalize the movement to new situations. So the last part of my presentation will be about geometric structures. So we have the chance in robotics to have geometries that we can exploit, and we have a lot of structures here. When we want to control the end effector of the robot, we will typically not only consider Cartesian space with XYZ coordinates, but we will also care about the orientation of the end effector. And here, this orientation, we can represent it as unit quaternions. And the underlying geometry is a sphere, it's a hypersphere. So here we are exploiting the Riemannian geometry framework as a way to treat the problem in an homogeneous way, independently of the geometry we need to consider. So it means that we can build a set of tools that we can first test with spheres, but that we can later apply to other geometries. So this is something that we found very useful, because we can first treat the problem typically with orientation data, but the algorithms being developed can then later be applied to other manifolds. And these other manifolds, it's including symmetric positive definite matrices with covariances, ellipsoids. This can be manipulability, stiffness, inertia, and so on. Can also be used for hyperbolic embeddings by considering trees, graphs, and networks. And it can be used for subspaces, for planes and lines, or null space projection operators. So as you can see, robotics is rich in these structures, and if we exploit these structures in a good manner, then we can also rely on fewer demonstration data in order to learn the task efficiently. So here I will give a single example with manipulability ellipsoids, which can be used as a task descriptor. And it's a useful descriptor when we want to transfer skills from one robot embodiment to another robot embodiment. or from the user to the robot. These descriptors are defining the preferred directions in which we can apply a velocity or a force. So it's the underlying description is a pose, and it's like it's a pose, but that is not that is in some way like independent of the kinematic chain that we consider. So here it's if we have a given pose, we will have manipulability that will have preferences for some directions over other directions. And here we could demonstrate that we could exploit this as a way to exploit data sets that were recorded with human users, and that we could apply this data set to a robot with a different kinematic chain. Here we are using a centaur robot to do this. So it's not possible to directly transfer at joint angle level, but if we were using these manipulability ellipsoids as descriptors, then we could demonstrate that we could transfer pose information indirectly through these descriptors.
So Sylvain, sorry to interrupt you. You have 1 minute left, but you're perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, it's my last slide, so the timing was good. Thanks for the notification. Yeah, so in summary, so what I wanted to emphasize in my presentation is that there are several forms of variations that can be considered to have safer robots collaborating with users. At a kinematic level, at a task level, and at a planning level. That we can use different learning strategies, and that we need to combine these different learning strategies, and that we can exploit this in order to acquire better training data. So we have a way to act on the data, so we should exploit it as best as possible. Then one of the takeaway message is that movement primitives should be extended to behavior primitives, so to look at the controller aspect and to mix time-dependent behavior together with time-independent behaviors by exploiting coordinations, task variations, and model uncertainties. But we should likely consider multiple coordinate systems to do this. And that in general, we have a lot of data structures and geometries that we should exploit if we would like to have a robot's learning from a small set of interactions. So that's the persons behind this work. I have the videos and source codes on my webpage. And while answering questions, I will just let this video run. That is a very typical Swiss example of learning from demonstration, as you will see in the video. So thanks for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions.
So many thanks for your presentation. And I don't know if there are any questions. I can see them in the chat. Maybe there are some just last second questions, or otherwise I have a curiosity, but probably this video is going to answer my curiosity, because I mean your work is impressive in the sense of I mean it really gives the idea of bringing robotics and letting everybody be able to control a robot and instruct somehow with a robot. So I was wondering whether you have some experience among all your projects probably on letting people who are novel to robots, who are, I mean, come outside from our labs, to use your algorithms and your methodologies to really interact with robots and control them and command them.
Yeah, so ideally we would like these interfaces to be as user-friendly as possible. What is very challenging is that we have various users. Typically, like if we make the comparison with interfaces for computers, some users will prefer graphical user interfaces. Some other users will prefer a command line. So sometimes we will have to build different ways, different interfaces to program the robot. And ideally, we would not like the users to be forced to use an interface that we build, but instead providing also the flexibility in the way the user can teach the robot new skills. So it's highly challenging. It's something that we are investigating in the Codiman project. And the idea is to bring the user much earlier in the pipeline in order to avoid having something being developed in lab environment by thinking about what the user will need. And then if it's only tested at a late stage in the project, then the problem is that we cannot exploit the feedback from the users about the interface. So here, this project is about starting from the user instead of starting from the, let's say, technological development.
Okay, so many thanks again. I think we should stop this video because it's getting lunchtime, so it's quite hurting. And again, many thanks for your interesting presentation. And I think we could move to the next talk and then introducing the next presenter.